Welcome to the Intrusions, Indepth podcast. This is Josh Stepp. This is the final episode in my Curious Case of PhineasFisher series. I think. PhineasFisher may resurface and I might have more to talk about. No promises. The idea of hacktivism is shrouded in secrecy, populated by individuals or groups who use obscure aliases, monikers. Sometimes they are as they seem, individuals utilizing cyber attacks as another means of resistance or to draw attention to a cause. Some are just fronts for state-sponsored APT groups. Think Guardians of Peace, the moniker the Lazarus Group used in the Sony hack. More on that in a future episode. However, in my opinion, none are as infamous or impactful as the attacker who goes by PhineasFisher. Like I've said a few times, the manifestos published by PhineasFisher helped fill in knowledge gaps in my own understanding of offensive methods and earlier in my career. Sure, they didn't melt the world or cause a cyber war, something Popov seemed to be after. See the previous episode in this series for more on that. But they did shut down Hacking Team. They brought attention to the commercialized mobile offensive tools market, whatever, I'm going to call a spade, spyware, to the public's attention, elevating the story from a small group of people who read Citizen Lab reports to a broader audience who like doom porn. Doom porn being the constant bad news that people can't look away from. If it bleeds, it leads, the old newspaper sayings goes. I want this episode to be digestible for those who haven't listened to the entire series, but I think you'll get the most out of it if you listen to it all. Here's a brief recap for those who haven't followed along in the series. In 2014, PhineasFisher burst onto the scene by infiltrating the systems of Gamma Group, a British-German company that sold controversial surveillance software to governments worldwide. PhineasFisher leaked 40 gigabytes of internal data, including client lists, source code, and shined a light on the world of the commercial spyware industry. But this was really just the beginning. PhineasFisher's most audacious attack came in 2015, when they targeted Hacking Team, an Italian company that provided hacking and surveillance tools to law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and some pretty sketchy governments and possibly Mexican cartels. In a brazen attack, PhineasFisher exfiltrated over 400 gigabytes of data from the Hacking Team servers. This was email, client lists, financial documents, even the source code for their marquee product, the Remote Control System Software, or RCS. All of it was laid bare for the world to see. They even stole their Twitter account and used that to troll the employees at Hacking Team. Now, this leak was a bombshell. It exposed Hacking Team's dealings with regressive regimes and sparked a global debate about the unregulated trade of spyware to governments that routinely violate human rights. Hacking Team scrambled to do damage control, but the revelations from PhineasFisher's campaign was catastrophic to the company's reputation and bottom line. Italian authorities launched an extensive investigation into the breach, but they even had to admit they had no idea who PhineasFisher really was. The hacker's identity remains a mystery even to this day. And I've done plenty to speculate on this. Feel free to listen to the last episode if you want to hear those mental gymnastics. Now, in the aftermath, PhineasFisher published a detailed step-by-step guide on how they broke into Hacking Team's network, almost like a tutorial for other hacktivists to follow. It was a rare peek behind the curtain, how the sausage was made. But PhineasFisher was just getting started. In 2016, they struck again, this time at the Catalan Police Union in Spain, leaking personal data to protest police corruption and brutality. Later that year, PhineasFisher also claimed to have hacked Turkey's ruling AKP party, leaking emails and documents to WikiLeaks in retaliation for the Turkish government's crackdown on political dissidents and the oppression of the Kurdish people. With each new hack, PhineasFisher's reputation as a kind of cyber Robin Hood grew, stealing from the powerful to expose their secrets, inspiring an entire generation of activist hackers. HACKBACK. Followers who published their own manifestos and tutorials while particularly upending the zero-day mobile exploit and desktop spyware industry. And they did it all while maintaining total anonymity, leaving law enforcement agencies around the world kind of grasping at shadows and arresting poor people they stole Bitcoin from. But little did they know, PhineasFisher had an even more ambitious plan in the works. something that would take hacktivism to a whole new level. But before we do that, let's not get sued.
The information presented in this show is sourced from publicly available materials and does not contain any classified or proprietary content. The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests alone and do not reflect the official policy or position of their employers or any affiliated organizations. Enjoy the show.
Now, you might be wondering, what would drive someone to take such enormous risk to put themselves in the crosshairs of powerful corporations and government agencies? Well, for PhineasFisher, it appears that it wasn't personal gain or notoriety. It was about something much bigger. In a stunning move, PhineasFisher actually donated the proceeds from one of their hacks to a cause that they believed in. In 2016, they claimed to have stolen 10,000 euros from a bank and donated it to a group in Rojava, an autonomous region in northern Syria that was implementing a radical model of direct democracy, and they also highlighted women's rights. Now, maybe I'm just arguing with Ghost here, but in the past, I've seen quite a bit of criticisms lobbed at other cultures and societies based on the equality of these autonomous zones. And while I'm all for equality and everyone being treated like human beings, this equality is mostly seen as a means to survival. And that's not discounting it, it's just calling it what it is. There's a strong culture of women's rights in these movements as women took up arms in resistance to Turkish government campaigns against them. Participation in the guerrilla insurgency tactics, carrying out suicide bombing operations, and even forming militias to stand up to ISIS. So I think it's clear why women's rights is such a focus and cornerstone of this culture. They might not have a culture if the women didn't help fight back. And I'm not trying to come off as dismissive or anything like that. I just know that people often cite these groups as forward-thinking and compare them to the Muslims, in which women typically don't have the same rights as men, generally speaking. And as you can imagine from this podcast title and how I like to get into the weeds, it was out of necessity for the cause and the communist roots that drove these women to take up arms. Without women being willing to take up the arms, they didn't have the population to fight back effectively. Again, this goes without saying. I'm not advocating for women to have more, less, or different rights or anything like that. I'm a proud American, and I want everyone to have the same rights as outlined in the Constitution to pursue their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, however they seem fit. Generally speaking, of course. Also, I don't believe you should be able to rob someone else's rights as a means to enhance your own. That's not how it works. And nothing against Muslims or any other faith people believe in. If it works for you and you're happy, I'm happy for you. I'm not trying to bash anyone here. Let's get back to PhineasFisher giving away money. Most attackers that aren't conducting military or espionage attacks are financially motivated. They're doing it for the money. Think about that for a second. A bank robber who gives the money away to freedom fighters halfway around the world. It sounds like something straight out of a cyberpunk novel. But that's the kind of iconic, poetic gesture that sets PhineasFisher apart. Like I said when I started this series, PhineasFisher was different. Unless it was a front for some geopolitical strategy. I'm going to keep it charitable, though. It's also worth noting that the redistribution of wealth, if true, is completely unprecedented in the world of cybercrime. Financially motivated attackers steal money all the time, but it's usually to line their own pockets, like I said earlier. What kind of attacker steals from the rich and gives to the poor? What kind of attacker is essentially crowdfunding a revolution in Syria by ripping off banks in cyberspace?
Russians who want to play games and taunt Turkey because they shot down a Russian pilot.
Okay. Once we take off our tinfoil hat here, the answer is PhineasFisher. And this is a whole new model of hacktivism, a kind of anarchist wealth redistribution through cybercrime, madness. And whether you agree with their politics or not, it's hard to deny the subversive brilliance to it. Especially if you're a cyberpunk middle-aged man wannabe that loved the movie Hackers and the hacker culture of old. Of course, there's no way to verify if this bug bounty donation actually happened. PhineasFisher could be making the whole thing up. But even the idea of it, the mythology around it, speaking to the power of what PhineasFisher represents, is kind of fascinating. Now, this is hacktivism as like a form of performative art, as political theater. PhineasFisher isn't just exposing the misdeeds of the powerful, they're painting a picture of an alternate future, one where the tools of the oppressors are turned against them and used to fund liberation struggles around the world. Powerful idea, and one that appeared to have captured the imagination of a global community of hacktivists to see PhineasFisher as like a sort of cyber-revolutionary folk hero of sorts. As such, in a later manifesto, PhineasFisher announced that they are launching their own bug bounty program. This isn't like your typical bug bounty through like HackerOne or something legit like that. PhineasFisher was offering to pay other hackers up to $100,000 of their own money to carry out politically motivated attacks against big corporations. They call it the hacktivist bug hunting program, and the targets they mention are companies like Israeli spyware vendor NSO Group, oil giant Halliburton, and major mining and livestock corporations in South America. And let's not get it twisted on the play of words here. These are like unauthorized pen tests. Unauthorized in that those companies didn't say, hey, please hack us for this bug bounty. Kind of a loose way to use the word bug bounty. Basically, PhineasFisher is crowdfunding hacktivism, putting their own money on the line to incentivize other hackers to launch public interest hacks and data leaks. They see it as a way to encourage hackers to use their skills for social good to make real difference in the world, as they see it. Of course, it goes without saying that what PhineasFisher is proposing here is completely illegal. They're offering to pay for what amounts to be criminal hacking activity. But the legality of something has never really stopped them in the past. And we know from previous interviews, especially the Vice interview, that what they see as legal and right are usually inversely proportional. In their manifesto, PhineasFisher frames it as an almost ethical obligation, saying hacking to obtain and leak documents with public interest is one of the best ways for hackers to use their abilities to benefit society. That was a quote. They even referenced their previous hack of a bank, saying that they want to share the wealth and, quote, provide enough funds so hackers can make a decent living doing a good job, end quote. This also holds true as PhineasFisher justifies the leaking of data as it's better than trying to file a FOIA or Freedom of Information request, something often criticized as government employees have figured out tricks and ways to delay or get around the spirit of the law, using alternative official business accounts, servers, fake names of people, or redacting everything useful but those specific terms, all while making you wait long periods of time and in some cases charging you for the privilege of knowing what's happening with your tax dollars. But the big question we have to ask is, was this effective and did anyone take it up? Well, to answer that question, not really. One of the first bounties they claimed to pay out was $10,000 to an attacker responsible for the Milko leaks. This was the theft and release of over 3,500 emails from the Chilean military personnel in late 2019. Now, this leak made headlines in Chile after the army publicly acknowledged the breach in December, blaming, quote, cyber criminals for compromising 6 military email accounts. They tried to downplay it all, saying it was only like 6 accounts, basically not a big deal. Don't waste your time looking at this. But the attackers' manifesto told a different story. One of retaliation against state repression amidst widespread protests rocking the country. Quote, freedom for the political prisoners in Chile, justice for those who have mutilated and murdered by the Chilean state, end quote, the manifesto declared. Quote, we are tired, angry, and more united than ever, end quote. In an article for Vice Motherboard titled, PhineasFisher says they paid $10,000 bounty to person who hacked Chilean military by Lorenzo Franceschi Biccarare. I'll link it in the show notes. It states, quote, PhineasFisher said that this was an important leak because it showed that some agents of the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet were released after serving just a short time in prison despite having long sentences for human rights crimes. The hacker also highlighted the timing of the leak, which came as the country was rocked by widespread protests, end quote. And for what it's worth, it appears that this hack had minimal impact in Chile. But let's look at it through a different lens. First, who is Augusto Pinochet? Well, as you probably guessed from the previous quote, he was a dictator in Chile. specifically from 1973 to 1990. Like almost all dictators, he was big on human rights violations, being an authoritarian, and suppression of his political opposition. Sounds like a great leader. I mean, he did some crazy stuff, allegedly speaking. He introduced his own constitution, which gave the president more powers. Shocker. Held thousands of people in the National Stadium of Santiago and executed them without a trial, or jailed or assassinated people who was against him politically. He also had a secret police, censored the media, and controlled what was taught in schools, and made sure that the culture that was promoted aligned with his ideology. All in all, a regressive period in time for Chile. Pinochet's dictatorship ended when he agreed to hold a national vote in 1988, in which the Chilean people voted against extending his rule. Of course they did. Following this, democratic elections were held in 1989, and Pinochet handed over power to the civilian government in 1990. Although he remained the commander-in-chief of the army until 1998, and he held a position as senator for life, a title he granted himself before stepping down. How convenient. And this lends credence to my opinion of PhineasFisher being a Spanish speaker from South America. It also further supports the notion that PhineasFisher isn't a fan of authoritarians. Going back to the original reason Gamma Group and Hacking Team was targeted, their enablement of human rights abuses. The attacker responsible for the attack appeared to be closely aligned with PhineasFisher's ideas as well, through the use of shorter manifestos than the hackbacks. And, well, they would probably have the same ideals of the people being ruled, I would imagine. In the Vice article, during the interview, PhineasFisher did reveal that they hadn't received any submissions for the bug bounty program either, which, to be honest, is what I would expect. It sounds like a good idea, but there's a ton of risk in both parties involved. It's usually not a good idea to give evidence of a crime you committed to someone you barely know. $100K, potentially, isn't worth the years in prison. These targets are usually well-funded organizations with legal teams. But the legacy of PhineasFisher isn't about the bug bounty program. It's about the hackback manifestos, showing their power of hacktivism for social change, fighting for causes the attacker or attackers believe in, and documenting it, as well as your ideals in a way for the next generation to carry on the tradition. And we even have evidence of this. In 2022, a hacktivist group calling themselves Guacamaya burst onto the scene in a big way. Taking their name from the Mayan word for macaw parrot, the group claimed responsibility for hacking numerous mining and oil companies as well as government agencies across Central and South America. Their stated goal? To, quote, sabotage Western companies and corporations that they saw as exploiting the region's natural resources. This appears to loosely align with PhineasFisher's ideals, or at least close to them.
These could be Russians like Popov as well. It's the Russians.
And I guess that too. Guacamaya's victims reads like a who's who of the fossil fuels industry. A Colombian government agent that administers hydrocarbon materials, the Guatemalan Ministry of Environmental and Natural Resources, oil companies in Colombia and Venezuela, mining giants in Brazil and Chile. The list goes on. The group published thousands of stolen emails through the hacktivists group Distributed Denial of Secrets and a site called Enlace Hacktivista. Like all things PhineasFisher, Vice Motherboard wrote an article titled Meet the Environmental Hacktivists Trying to Sabotage Mining Companies by Lorenzo Francesca Bicarara. And big shout out to Lorenzo for publishing these over the course of his career. Without his work, none of this podcast series would be possible. Now, in an email to Motherboard, the attackers explained their motives, saying, quote, it is a matter of exposing the companies and government entities so that everyone knows their way of operating, their actions, their profits, and their interests that is clearly to profit, no matter the damage they cause, end quote. Guacamaya also published a manifesto decrying how countries like the United States and Western corporations have taken advantage of Central America's resources. The name of their manifesto? HACKBACK, a DIY guide to digital monkey wrenching. In the manifesto, they wrote, quote, we have been alive for 500 years defending life and life itself. We have spirit and love. We are dreaming of going back to clear days and following paths with harmony and balance with our mother, Earth, end quote. The attackers claimed that their breaches took little time, with the companies being, quote, easily vulnerable. A video they released shows the hack of Pronico, a Guatemalan mining company, in a matter of months. I'll break that down in a moment. Guacamaya's tactics and philosophy clearly draw inspiration from the notorious hacktivist PhineasFisher. Some have speculated that PhineasFisher is Guacamaya, or a part of it. I don't know. It's a tantalizing thought, but maybe people are nostalgic for a Robin Hood-esque story of PhineasFisher. Like PhineasFisher, Guacamaya ended with challenging others to take up the fight, proclaiming, quote, "Just leak and sabotage with joyous rebellion." I like the spirit. So let's dive into the technical analysis of Guacamaya's attack on Pronico, the Guatemalan mining company. In the interest of time, given that it's an over 2.5 hour long video, I want to go over some of the highlights. The video opens with a series of animations featuring coyotes or some type of canine animal thing throwing Molotov cocktails with their mouth into mining equipment. Already, the production quality of these videos is vastly higher and, well, longer than the ones PhineasFisher released. But then again, they made no effort denying that Guacamaya is a team. From there, the familiar ASCII art from PhineasFisher's manifestos appear, HACKBACK. But this time, it was a DIY guide to digital monkey wrenching. Now, in the preamble or the preface of the document, it outlines that these Phoenix mines are part of a constant process in which companies violently extract resources from the local indigenous people. They take the minerals while polluting the local waterways. In exchange, they promise jobs and development that never materialize for the locals. From my point of view, I don't know if these claims are credible in this instance, but scenarios like this have been documented and it happens often. I don't think Guacamaya is reaching here. Now, I guess, spoiler alert, during the attack, they accessed emails and files and leaked them to journalists. And afterwards, they wiped the computers. Additionally, they encouraged others, much like PhineasFisher did in their hackback manifestos, to use hacking as an ethical tool and provided a target list of others in the form of a URL. Now, in the video they release, the attackers skipped over showing their reconnaissance and initial target selection. But they did highlight using an Indepth script to scan for a critical Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, CVE 2021-26855. Once they found a vulnerable Exchange server, they used the Metasploit framework to upload a web shell, specifically an ASPX shell with a proxy log on. From there, they pivoted to outlining some social engineering tactics for initial access. Not ones they used here, but also nothing really new. Kind of run-of-the-mill blue-collar hacking here. It's not fancy, just works. Now, one method involved creating a fake LinkedIn profile and pretending to be a new employee at a big company. Once they got enough connections, they could see employees, they had enough information for a target list for like a phishing campaign or password spraying. The other approach was more straightforward, just trying a list of known weak passwords against employee accounts. After gaining access, the real fun begins. Well, for them at least, and psychos like myself that like to read these, or in this case, watch a 2.5 hour long video. In what one could call a brazen move, they straight up used RDP to log into the domain controller and push out a group policy to enable file sharing on all the machines they wanted to steal data from. Again, this is super noisy, but maybe stealth isn't their top priority, obviously. Now, Guacamaya had a few clever tricks up their sleeves too. Noticing that most of the computers were VMs, they wrote a script to only operate on a target VM when the actual user was logged in, to avoid tripping any alarms. They also utilized a staging server to stash data before exfiltrating it after their first hiding spot on the actual Exchange server got discovered and wiped. Staging servers are pretty common in most campaigns, both in a place to store extracted data so you can package it up, usually with something like WinRAR or something along those lines before you ship it off to your VPS, or as a place to stage malware locally so you're not constantly reaching out to your malicious domain, or for the attacker's tools if it's just a good place to store them so you could reach them once you're inside the network. But here's where it gets really wild. The video covers attacks happening over an extended period of time. You could see the back and forth unfolding, almost like a cyber knife fight between the attackers and the IT team. And I just wanted to say cyber knife fight too. The company kept finding artifacts of the attack and trying to kick Guacamaya out. while the attackers kept coming back with new exploits and persistence methods. For example, after having some of their tools detected and cleaned up, they noticed the IT staff was looking for recently modified files in the NTFS file system. Guacamaya, in return, started time-stomping their malware and running it in the context of legitimate Windows processes, svchost.exe, and malicious DLLs in an effort to kind of sneak past their defenses. Now, DLLs are useful because most audit policies don't have visibility into DLL execution. You could see it in like a process command line auditing, for example, but those tend to be noisy for SVC hosts, so you would need a way to kind of look through all of the strings or the arguments at once. This illustrated the kind of cat and mouse game that can go on when you're trying to evict keyboard commandos on the other side. It can be difficult to get them all out at once. Arnico even tried rolling back to old VM snapshots to erase the attacker's persistence, but the old images were missing patches for nasty bugs like Print Nightmare, so Guacamaya just exploited them again to regain access. Now, Print Nightmare refers to a set of critical vulnerabilities discovered in the Windows Print Spoiler service, which manages print jobs on Windows operating system. The vulnerability was first publicly disclosed in 2021 and were given the collective name Print Nightmare due to their severity and the widespread impact that they could have. The vulnerabilities affected all supported versions of Windows, including Windows 7, 8, which no one uses, 10, and various other versions of Windows Server. Given the critical nature of these flaws, they were a significant concern for enterprises and individuals alike, particularly those with like network printers and shared printing services. Just about everyone uses a printer after all. Specifically, Print Nightmare refers to 3 CVEs or common vulnerabilities and exposures, most notably CVE 2021-34527 and CVE 2021-1675. While CVE 2021-1675 was initially reported as a privilege escalation issue, it became clear that it also involved RCE, or remote code execution, which led to the name Print Nightmare. Here in the West, we like to market our bugs. We like to try and tie them to merch as well sometimes, maybe give them their own website. In the spirit of PhineasFisher's style of sharing lessons learned and thoughts while conducting their operations, Guacamaya listed 2 mistakes they made during the attack as well, like the attackers kept getting detected, mainly by Kaspersky. As they were modifying services for persistence, they were using PowerShell to invoke sc.exe. Kaspersky alerted on this and blocked it, quite often it appears. They discovered later, post-operation, that using services.py and the Impact suite of tools would let legit Windows functions modify the service, thus not get blocked. They also stressed the importance of testing the environment for their payloads. This is a common practice among attackers, but it's something PhineasFisher called out during their attacks on Gamma Group and Hacking Team. Once they had the emails and files they wanted to dump from the individual computer stations, they attempted to wipe the systems, but it took multiple attempts to wipe them completely. Initially, they went after the VMs. They deleted SANs, storage area networks, and wiped them out. However, the data was eventually recovered because the group had a good recovery system in place, I guess. Next, they went on to delete Office 365 and OneDrive accounts. Doing this, they thought would buy them time to completely wipe the systems further, but it didn't exactly work. In one instance, they even tried to use Kaspersky's Software Center, which is like their device management and security solution, to wipe the data as if like laptops were stolen or something along those lines. But still, they were having a hard time. In another instance, when they rolled to backups, it evicted the attackers to the network level. However, they also had a network device that they had previously backdoored. Now, this is significant in my opinion, as it shows the actual messiness of like the cyber kill chain in action. It's typically not linear and isn't a series of like one after the other. Once you do this, you move on to that. It's more closely like, hey, you take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forwards, back 1, and so forth until they are interrupted and kicked from the network or they achieve the actions on objective. At another point in the attack chain, their Meterpreter, I am assuming, payloads kept getting detected by the Kaspersky AV device management solution. They needed a lighter implant with the ability to download and upload files, run commands, and port forward. The trade-off of less functionality compared to something more robust, like the previously mentioned Meterpreter payload, is that it's much smaller. However, to get around their AV, they compiled the payload without any of the fprintf or printf statements. This way, the AV didn't have strings to alert on. But this Kaspersky AV was proving to be a pain. The attackers were getting more familiar with the network, but they were running into slight problems of the modern world: behavioral detections and AV sandbox analysis. Kaspersky was installed on almost all of their computers, and it was fighting back. So to counteract this, the attackers used checks for environmental variables and programs before executing the main function on their payload, thus revealing all of the tricks of the implant. This meant they needed to build a new implant for each target, which is time-consuming, but it slows down how fast their payloads are burned. Using the same payload on every system is easier and more convenient. However, it makes fingerprinting and detection easier as well. This is like execution guardrails to avoid detection. I like it. They used a VPS like PhineasFisher and, well, a lot of threat actors do. And they also set up a DNS tunnel and port forwarded across port 53 to their SOCKS proxy and various jump boxes. While this makes it a pain to track their traffic, they saw the downsides of this as well with all these jumps. It made their RDP connections extremely slow, and they disconnected often. Ultimately, they used a scheduled task within Kaspersky to wipe all of the computers, but before they did that, they topped things off by clearing their logs. Good old event ID 1102. I skipped over a lot of the more nuanced portions of the video and some of the details, as this was really, in my opinion, not a PhineasFisher attack. More on that in a moment, but it just doesn't feel the same to me. It doesn't look the same. They're missing the noticeable humor from PhineasFisher's hackback manifestos, for one of the glaring differences. But as we wrap up this episode, we've taken a deep dive into PhineasFisher's bug bounty program, the motives behind it, and the controversial acts of Guacamaya. But as we reflect on the actions, an intriguing question arises. Is PhineasFisher part of Guacamaya? I don't think so. I believe the legacy of hackback worked. It inspired others to attack corporations that don't align with their beliefs or what they perceive as right and wrong in the universe. And I'm not trying to defend mining companies or spyware companies or bash them or anything like that. I'm trying to keep my bias out of this matter. These things have already happened, and the point I would want to stress is that doing this is illegal. If you want to do illegal stuff, just know that there can be consequences. Now go on and make your own grown-up decision. PhineasFisher, who emerged in the mid-2010s, targeted government agencies, surveillance companies, and even law enforcement. Their motives appear to be rooted in like an anti-authoritarian belief and aim to shine a light on the abuses of power and the overreach of state surveillance. PhineasFisher's methods were as much about the message as the damage inflicted, often accompanied by manifestos that sought to educate others in the art of hacking as a form of protest, and A+ Twitter trolling. It was good stuff. Fast forward to more recent years, and Guacamaya enters the scene, targeting similar institutions more focused in Latin America. Both appear to be Spanish speakers, but Guacamaya's actions are with a sharper focus on environmental issues, indigenous rights, and corporate malfeasance. While the specifics of their targets differ, the underlying philosophy shares a common thread: a deep distrust of authority and a belief in the power of information as a tool for justice. Their leaks are a form of information warfare, in my opinion, which ironically is something I talk about more on the next episode. So this would be a good time to subscribe and follow intrusionsindepth.com or follow on your favorite podcast app. Guacamaya, on the other hand, appears to be much more destructive, actually trying to wipe networks, delete data, and make it incredibly hard to operate. The equivalent, I guess, would be like PhineasFisher deleting hacking team source code, nuking that iSCSI device, or trying to knock the bank offline. More destructive means of cyber warfare, which isn't always as effective. Again, more on that in the next episode. The destruction stuff is typically frowned upon in the gentlemanly world of cyber espionage or cyber attacking. Shamble Gang, a group that has tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, that overlap with North Korea and Chinese APT groups, frequently use Cat B ransomware, as well as the crowd favorites of BestCrypt or BitLocker. Those are encryption tools to hide the evidence of their actions on network. And this is typically frowned upon and has drawn some scrutiny. You ruin the element of surprise as they know you were there. Maybe you make some money moonlighting if that's your thing. And we do know they don't appear to be paid very well. But with modern SIEMs and logging solutions being free or almost free, I don't think this always does what you need it to. Plus, not that they care, but this can seriously harm smaller governments and organizations, or even bigger ones. They may serve an ethical purpose: transplants, children's hospitals, processing medical records, storing x-rays, etc. It's an open secret that countries spy on each other, but let's save the destructive stuff for the real cyber war. Just my unsolicited opinion. Now back to PhineasFisher and Guacamaya. Yet, while there are similarities and they're striking, it's essential to recognize the unique contexts in which they operate. PhineasFisher's operations were more global, and like I said earlier, more anti-capitalistic, anti-surveillance agenda, while Guacamaya seems to be regionally focused, with a clear emphasis on Latin America's social political issues and environmental stuff. Plus, Guacamaya had some pretty skilled animators on their team. They put some effort in their video production. And with that, I think this is a good point to end this episode, and so far my series on PhineasFisher. I hope you enjoyed listening to the evolution, the attacks, and some of the outlying history on adjacent events over the past 6 hours. Who knows? If PhineasFisher reappears, there might be an episode 6 in the series. And as always, if you would like to hear more, visit the website at intrusionsindepth.com, where you'll find more stories on high-profile intrusions and the threat actors that conduct them. I'm Josh Stepp. Thanks for listening. Let's have the PhineasFisher theme song take us out one more time.
It's PhineasFisher, yeah, I'm back in the scene. A hacker on a mission, disrupting the machine. Hacking team took him down with finesse. For the rules and the truth, man, you know I confess. Read the Citizen Lab, saw the messed up report. PhineasFisher and the others, just a crooked cohort. I don't do it for the fame, not for the glory. Just to give the targets a break, that's my story.